Hey, it's Ashley from With Jack, and I am joined with Nigel from Structured Mediation. And I've asked Nigel to sit and chat to me today because one thing I hear from freelancers all the time when they have disagreements with clients is that they want to avoid anything legal. So one of your alternative options is mediation, but not a lot of freelancers use that option, and I think it's because they don't know much about it. And so today, we really want you to understand just how accessible and informal mediation can be as well. So Nigel, do you want to just give us a quick introduction to yourself, like who you are and what you do?
Okay, so my background overall, big picture is running PR companies. And then more latterly, I set up a business a few years ago, which is a matchmaking platform between employers looking for freelancers and PR freelancers. And of course, if you're sitting in the middle between buyer and seller, occasionally they fall out. And I was getting drawn into some conversations around, clients not happy with freelancers, and so I thought, well, let's dig a bit deeper. So I went and trained and got qualified to become a mediator. And what a mediator does is they create a kind of neutral space for two people in dispute to take the heat out of it, take the heat out of the problem. And if you've been, I'm sure at times you've been in dispute with people and you'll know how totally dominating it is in your life. To every waking hour, it's a kind of 3 a.m. looking at the ceiling, writing emails in your head because you're angry and whatever. And what mediation does is that it's where two people who have fallen out to quite a degree, can come together in a place where the emotion is taken out of it. What's happened to date is kind of left at the door of the room, and they focus on trying to solve a future. They try to work out what a future looks like. And that could mean they part company. It could be terminal, but terminal on terms that both parties think are fair, that they can live with, that they can sign up to. Or potentially it could be a way of getting a relationship that's gone wrong back on track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good origin story, by the way, of how you got into it. I have lots of questions. So, there are lots of alternative options that freelancers have to resolve disputes. Insurance is obviously one of them. Going and hiring a solicitor yourself is one of them. When and why would a freelancer choose to go for mediation instead of those other routes that we've just mentioned?
Okay, so you would start thinking about mediation seriously in that kind of grey area between this relationship is not quite right, there's grumbles, the nature of the emails are changing, or the nature of the conversations is changing at one end of the spectrum, and the other end is see you in court. I hate you, I just want to make you suffer. And in between, there's obviously quite a big area, and that's where mediation sits. So it's, I guess, if I was in dispute with a client, and I was thinking about my business, whether it's freelance or a major business, and you're thinking, should I plan any revenue from this client? Is this a solid relationship? And if you've taken that client relationship in your head, or if you have a process to do it from it's green and it's now well into amber, then obviously you don't want it to get to red. And if you're thinking, well, that client used to be worth, round numbers, £10,000 a year to me, I really shouldn't plan for that next year. I can't see us working together any longer on that basis, or I'll take it out of my financial forecast. I think once you've got to the point where mentally you're taking it out of your business future, then probably you're thinking this is not heading to a good place. And that is probably a good signal to say, how can I get this back on track? Mm-hmm. And if you've tried, of course, your first step, your first port of call will be to say, let's try to resolve it. Let's try to sit down, you and I, let's try to sort this out between us. And if that hasn't worked, then I think that's when you probably should be thinking, well, if my own efforts to solve the problem, to take the heat out of it, haven't worked, and the anger is still there, the dispute remains or is getting even worse, then that's a point where you say, well, I can either just walk away, write it off, or I can fight, go to court. And the middle ground is that, well, let's try a different way to get somebody in who hasn't got a dog in the fight. They are a neutral party who can try and help both of us find a way forward. So it's that combination of mentally I've taken out of my future financial projections because I can feel the relationship has decayed. I've tried on my own account, I've tried my own efforts to try to get the relationship back on track, to try to, find new ways of working. That hasn't worked. So what's left is either walk away or do a different route, which is to try to solve it through mediation.
It kind of ties really nicely into my next question, actually. Thanks for that. One of the themes that is recurring with our customers is that their relationships are so important to them. And I'm talking about even when they are in the thick of a dispute, they still worry about keeping the relationship as intact as possible. And I think that's because to a freelancer, their reputation's everything, and they want to be known as somebody that's easy to work with and good to work with. So when I think of mediation, I kind of have this idea in my head of two angry individuals sitting in a room across the table from one another, being accusatory. You said this and you didn't do that. But are there situations that you've mediated where there actually isn't any hostility between the client and the freelancer, so there's a good relationship, it's just that they need a little bit of a helping hand in reaching a solution?
Yeah, probably all of us have had some sort of mediation in our lives because, we've all got people that we turn to, wise counsel, someone that you trust who you can go to and say, help me work this out in my head. I'm having a problem. I can't see the wood for the trees. Can you help me, think through the problem with me? And sometimes that is a kind of informal mediation where, someone that you trust is able to give you that advice to kind of take a different tack, and what's worked, what hasn't worked so far needs to be put in the past. But I think that, I'm looking at the dog, getting a biscuit here, is that having somebody who doesn't have, as a dog in the fight, they don't have a stake in the outcome is really important. And that's what a mediator does. And a mediation is not like some group hug. It's not a kind of rainbows and butterflies session where, you do start with people who are angry. People, they're quite locked in, and you see it in their body language. Very often it is, that kind of body language at the beginning, and arms folded and stuff like that. But they need help to put that to one side. And a mediation generally begins with both sides or both parties in the dispute sending through, here's my position, here's a bunch of emails which have led to this point, here's what I think about this person, here's what they've done wrong. And what you try to do and what you must do is leave that at the door. You might have it in the room to say we might need to refer back to emails, we might need to refer back to things that were said, but we're not going to go over old ground here. We're going to move. This is a forward-looking process, and one that almost every dispute begins with a point where you say that's where the communication changed. It was a failure of communication was the origin. When you trace it, you pull the thread right back, and particularly in the field that I come from, of PR and comms and creative services, because it's always very rare where a client and a freelancer or a consultant, whatever you want to call them, just have a purely buyer and seller relationship. Work is created together in creative spaces. Creative work, it's really hard to pull apart and say, well, who contributed to that campaign when it was launched? How much of that was the consultant or the freelancer putting it together, and how much of it was the client engaging and leaning into the process? So when those things start to unravel, it's quite hard to say, it's not like you said you would deliver 10,000 blue boxes by 10 a.m. and he didn't, which is a kind of very binary commercial transaction where you can say something didn't happen that was supposed to happen and therefore we're in dispute. Creative disputes or creative disagreements, they emerge quite slowly.
Yes, they
and,
do.
They kind of come out of the fog almost. And, it's only eventually you look back and say, oh, yeah, that was the point where I knew. Or looking back, that was when the dispute hardened into something more than bad vibes. And the mediator is there to ask both parties in a very deliberate, structured way, go through a process where you say, okay, you're sitting on that side of the table, you're on that side of the table, and you both have positions. You believe that this person's done you wrong for this reason, this reason, this reason, and you want them to do that, that, and that to compensate you, to make it right. And the other side will have a mirror position. I say, well, you didn't ask me to do that. And, so you start with two people who hold positions. And that's kind of quite a legalistic way of thinking of it. And that's where lawyers are great because they defend their client's position and they'll attack the other person's position. And what a mediator does is to say, okay, you have that position, you have that position. And then in individual private conversations, you say, I understand that's your position, but what do you want to happen? And there are three elements to it. So you've got a position, what you want, which is a future looking, if this person just pays me that £10,000, we can walk away, we'll never talk to each other again, and, fine, case closed, and that's a fair deal. Because if they do that, then that £10,000 allows me to do that other thing, the thing I really want to do now. The relationship is gone with that person, so now it's about how can I get that £10,000 to help me, enable me to do the thing I really want. So you've got your position, you've got what you want, which you might not know entirely when you begin the mediation process. And then the middle is what do you need to happen to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And that's what mediation does. It goes through by a series of questioning sessions where they're very open questions. So, I said just now that a lawyer will take the view of, here is my client's position. And, the kind of cliche of lawyers is you never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Whereas a mediator never asks the question they do know the answer to.
Right.
They should be asking questions that say, having just heard what the other party says, where does that take you now? And what do you think you need to do to satisfy that? So you're asking endless open questions that you don't know the answer to, because the mediator is not there to advise. The mediator cannot advise, they must not advise, and they're not a judge either. We'll maybe come back to that in a bit. But the mediator is not there to say, okay, I've heard what you have said, why don't you propose this? You must never do that.
Right.
The hard work is done by the two parties. They have to do all the heavy lifting of thinking, well, what do I want? I've heard what the other person has said now. And sometimes mediation is the first time that two people have sat in a room together for weeks or even months. They've been firing angry emails at each other and it's got more and more locked down. And that first session across the table can be the first time they've looked each other in the eye in a calm, professional way and have said how they feel. And that can be revelatory. Sometimes you can sit in front of somebody and, and even in arguments with our friends or our partners, we've probably all had that moment where you've gone, I had no idea you thought that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I genuinely had no idea that that's how you were thinking. And that can be such a big moment in a mediation. And it can begin with somebody saying, look, I'm sorry. I can see from, your body language, how you've spoken to me today that I've really upset you. And it was never my intention. But, we've got a problem to solve. But can I just say, I'm sorry? And that can be, boom, such a transformative moment in a conversation that leading up to that has been weeks or months of firing angry emails or, avoiding each other or just kind of passive aggressive nonsense. And, just that moment of saying, this is how I feel. Mm-hmm. And this is how I'd like you to respond. And then the other person say, well, now you've heard that. How do you want to respond?
Yeah.
You're hearing things perhaps for the first time in a mediation and having to think about, well, now that I've heard that, I need to go away into a private session with the mediator and think about what I need to do now. Mm-hmm. And then the mediator says, okay, well, you've heard that they're prepared to make an offer of £5,000, not £10,000. You need to think about what that does now to the conversation. Not to say you should accept it, definitely not, but to say, you've heard an offer, you've heard their point of view, maybe for the first time, articulated in a very careful way. What do you now think about what you need to do to get to that position you've described to me of what you want? So it's a load of probing, open questions which help both participants in private session to consider what they've just heard and how they should respond. And bit by bit, you start with maybe 6 points at issue, 6 points of dispute. And hopefully what you do is you can knock out number 5 and 6 pretty quickly, because they're the kind of the easy ones to agree on, or they're the easiest ones to settle. And of course, like in any negotiation, it's the last one or two that are the knotty ones. The last yard of the negotiation is always the hardest. But what you do is bit by bit, you take each participant and help them go on a journey of their own making. You don't, as I say, you don't guide them, you don't advise them. But what you do is you ask a load of questions which just help them to go, right, okay, I think I understand how this person feels now. And my response then is this. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, are you willing to put that to them? You've thought about it, have a think about it for a few minutes. And then if you're ready to make that response, then let's make it. If you're not, then, we can pause for a little moment and just, let it percolate in your mind. And the kind of the physical setup, it can be done on Zoom, but if it's face to face, you basically have 3 rooms. Room A, room B for the 2 individual parties to be private, and then a room in the middle. And I did a mediation a few months ago in 3 rooms in a hotel, kind of not very far down the corridor. And I looked, and I'd done 6,000 steps because you were just going backwards and forwards, kind of going, right, they've moved an inch.
Yeah.
Are you prepared to move an inch with them? And, and bit by bit, people that start there just edge closer together. And it's not guaranteed to succeed. Mediation has, according to ACAS, has about a roughly 80% success rate, whereby, within a week or so, both parties have signed an agreement they can both live with. So it is very successful, but it's not always successful. If you are genuinely in dispute, then sometimes you just have to part company and one has to give what the other one wants, or end up in court.
Which is what your insurance is for.
Absolutely.
But the part I don't understand, so I understand people getting into a room together to discuss things, but you mentioned that you also have another room to discuss with them individually.
Yeah, most of the work is done in private session.
Right, I'd see. This is the idea. Yeah. No, it's just my misunderstanding. Like I said, when my picture is 2 people across from each other at a table getting quite angry, but most of it's done privately.
Well, the thinking is done privately.
Right.
Because, you probably wouldn't want to, go into a meeting where someone says, okay, well, how about if I do this? And then immediately respond and say, okay, I agree.
Yeah.
You might want to say, okay, thank you. I've understood what you've said. Let me think about it. Mm-hmm. And so you go away and you respond. So, yeah, I mean, most of the discussion is between the mediator in private. And sometimes that meeting of the two people never happens. There can be that choice. Right. It's entirely up to the participants that they can have a joint meeting, but sometimes that can be, unproductive. If the relationship is so toxic, and I've seen that happen, where one party said, do you want a joint meeting? It was like, no, we cannot be in the same postcode as these people, Wow. It was absolutely broken.
And just like out of curiosity, were you able to resolve that situation?
It did get resolved, yeah. Very bruising, very, very bruising for both parties. But they got there eventually because they both felt, and this is an important point to make about mediation, is that both parties should have to want to mediate. You can't force someone to mediate because, how can you force someone to go through a process of thinking about changing and whatever. So both parties have got to come to that session absolutely, certain of how strong their case is or how strong their arguments are, but willing to say, we are open to a conversation here. We're open to trying to solve this today, forever. Because, maybe in their minds, we're sick of this back and forth.
Of course.
It's taking too much time. It's taking so much emotional energy, so much, intellectual drainage and cost, because all of that is time wasted. And, I've been in disputes. Everybody watching this has been in a dispute. And that time spent drafting that email in your head that never gets sent, or maybe it does get sent and you regret it, the day after. That's time wasted, and it goes back to that point of what you want. And most people, by the time they're mediating, they're pretty fed up with the dispute rumbling on.
Yes.
Because that's kind of why they're in the room.
Yeah.
Is because they want to solve it and they think it can be solved. They accept the fact that what's gone before hasn't got to that point of resolution. There's still a distance to go, and despite best efforts, both parties have not been able to close that gap themselves, and that's why they need that external help or that external prompting or catalyst, if you like, of the mediation, but there is a willingness to do something. There is a willingness to change, but that compromise is never easy. You have to give something to compromise.
But what happens if at the end of this lengthy session, and I'm assuming sometimes it can go over one session, what happens if mediation hasn't been able to help resolve the dispute? What do people do then?
I mean, you can just remain in dispute. You just go back to where you were the day before, and just continue to try to solve it yourself and continue to have those, the go round the circle again to see whether or not through your own efforts, you can just persuade the other side to see your point of view and come to agree to exactly everything that you want. Or you can end up and say, well, we have to go and find a judge to sort this out.
But that's unlikely. Like you say, there's an 80% success rate, so that's unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, if both parties come to it with an open mind and a willingness to try to change their position, try to accommodate, and they're only going to do that if that thing they want is worth more to them than continuing the dispute. So, if you just think, well, okay, I don't care, I'll just stay locked in this kind of Cold War between us, and every now and again we'll fire an email at us and nothing will change, and we'll just live with this kind of stone in each other's shoe, basically. Or we can say, this is ridiculous, we're spending so much time, we've got so much money tied up in this dispute, because an invoice needs to be paid, or some work needs to be, released to the other party that then they can use. And it's far more valuable to find a way to release that.
Yes.
Because then we can go and do the thing that we actually want to do. What's gone is gone. We can't turn back the clock. Nobody wants to be in dispute unless you're some kind of psychopath.
Of which there are some out there.
Yeah. So some people love, some people live for the fight.
Yeah,
that's for sure. But they probably don't want to come to mediation.
Well, those are the kind of clients that I would say that would be when somebody would turn to their insurance, which we've seen plenty enough. It's when clients are unwilling to resolve things and it's really escalated to that point. That would be something that we could possibly help with. But I think the question that a lot of freelancers have, because they are, of course, conscious of the cost of these things, is mediation cheaper than hiring a solicitor or going through a small claims court? Like, can you give us any idea of the costs involved?
Well, I mean, you can go to, I mean, if the claim is less than £10,000, you can issue a claim through moneyclaim.gov, and you will have to mediate. You will go through a process of mediation through that. Well, sorry, you can refuse to mediate.
It looks bad on you if you do that.
Oh, it looks terrible. Yeah, I mean, if it ends up in court and you haven't mediated, if you then, you know, and you lose, then it's going to cost you a lot more. And, you know, and if you do end up, you know, going to court, if the money claim process doesn't work and whatever, then you can, and you end up in front of a judge, then the judge is going to say, go away and mediate.
Yeah.
They will almost force you to mediate before coming back. So, you know, the legal route, lawyers are lovely, love lawyers, all of them are wonderful people, but, you know, they are expensive people. The process is expensive. I mean, depending on the value of the claim, I mean, filing the papers is expensive. Yes. You know, it can be thousands of pounds simply to file the papers with the court. Mediation, depending on the value, can be a few £100s.
Yeah.
You know, even a couple of £100 if it's something that can be done through a 1 hour Zoom.
Yes.
You know, with very, very minimal involvement from the mediator. Just like basically, okay, you will be on a Zoom. Don't send me like a big pile of emails to read through because that's expensive time, and you probably don't need it. If it's not a trivial amount, you know, if it's a smallish amount, then you can mediate for a few £100s. And if it's substantially more, and there's a big pile of papers for the mediator to read, to understand, because the mediator has to understand the nature of the dispute before the mediation process. Even though they're not going to go through it line by line, they should be able to say, yes, I remember, you know, there was an email that to that effect, you know, and they've probably got a post-it note on it and they can refer back to it. But they're not going to go through it line by line. But so yeah, I mean, a big mediation, you know, in very large sum can be resolved, you know, for very, very low thousands. You know, like I'm talking £1,500, £2,000, and that's a big mediation. Very, like, that's a 6-7 figure mediation in dispute can be resolved by £1,500, £2,000. So correspondingly, a mediation of £10,000, £15,000 can be resolved through a few £100s. Yeah,
which I think is the bracket that most of, certainly when I look at our claims data, that would be what most of our customers would fall into. So a few £100s, or even worst case scenario, a few £1,000s to potentially save yourself, you know, more outlays in the long run. And also not just that, but you mentioned it yourself, it's also about putting it behind you and getting back to doing the bit that you're actually good at, getting on with the work.
I mean, when you're in a dispute, you know, you've got to be honest with yourself and say, looking back, how much time have I devoted to this? And that can be, you know, time, you know, writing emails or going back through documents, or, you know, the evidence base. But it's also the time spent talking to your partner over the dinner table, you know, or kind of being angry at your desk and not focusing on work from nice clients, you know, people that you're not in dispute with. And, you know, because it is all consuming for, you know, because we're all human. Nobody likes to be in the wrong. Nobody likes someone to sort of say, you know, you're rubbish at your job and, you know, you owe me money or whatever. All those things really, you know, dig deep in us. And they're enormous distractions. So you've got to sort of think, right, okay, there's the actual cost of time dealing with this issue, but there's also the opportunity cost, or the lost cost of time I could have spent either earning money with people or just not having those squirrels running around my head thinking about it, you know, at midnight, or your first waking thought. And you've got to weigh that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever we deal with a lot of this stuff, I feel like I relate to a lot of what you say because I see it with our side of things as well. Because I've been in the trenches for 9.5 years, helping people through situations in a different manner to yourself, of course. But whenever we are dealing with legal disputes, I always start by asking the freelancer, what's your ideal outcome here? Because it would be great to help them walk away from it as close to that as possible. But the reality is, if you've gotten to the point where you're in dispute with a client, nobody is going to be 100% happy with the outcome. There has to be some negotiation, there has to be some compromise. So with mediation, I'm assuming it's much the same. It's not like you're going to have a winner and a loser. It's really about helping both parties get to the stage where they're thinking, okay, this, it's a bit of a compromise, but it's a compromise that I can live with because it puts an end to the situation.
Yeah, and as I said before, it's that thinking, well, what does the future look like? Mm-hmm. If I can, again, let's simple round figures, the amount in dispute is £10,000. If I come away with 7, then I can use that £7,000 to refurbish my wonderful TV studio. Yeah. I can buy, an upgraded whatever it is. I can go to the next level of my technology. A much better, computer system, or buy a load of software that enables me to do that thing. Whatever it is, you can see a use for that money, and then so you got to focus on, is it worth me going for that? And that's the real value to you of that £7,500. It's what it enables you to do, as well as put behind you all the kind of mess in your head. And that's kind of got to be what your what's the best alternative to negotiated amount is your backstop. It's like, okay, if you offer me 7.5 instead of 10, I'll shake your hand and we can walk away. So you'll probably have some kind of number in your head, but it may be other things as well. It could be to say, it can be something as simple as, if that person just apologized, that would mean a lot to me.
I mean, we've noticed that, like, with our customers, a lot of the time it's down to the moral victory of it. It's not so much about the money, it's just their client's in the wrong and they want them to acknowledge that. So you see that as well?
Yeah. And, I think it can be, going back to that kind of vignette I painted of, I didn't know you thought that way. I'm genuinely, I'm shocked. I'm not a bad person. I just had no idea that my behavior made you feel that way. And, maybe we've all been in situations where that kind of emotional transaction has happened in our lives. It doesn't have to be a business dispute. It could be, anything, a family member, a friendship, whatever. And I go back to, I'm an optimist. I don't think people set out to be bad people.
Yes.
And it can be the point where they say, well, now you've said it like that. I had no idea. I need to just rewind a lot. And what you've said has changed how I think about everything that's gone before, and all the emails and all the angry stuff that's gone before. And maybe we could solve this. And I think it was something you touched on right at the beginning of the conversation, that there's this idea that a client relationship is a kind of binary thing. You've got that client, they are happy or they are unhappy. And, in my experience, clients work with people, whether they're freelancers, whether they're agencies, and there'll be elements in the relationship which are not functioning, but there may be, 70% of it is good.
Yep.
It's great. Let's not throw that away because over there we've just absolutely, we're like that. So, if we can solve that, then we can actually protect the 70, 80% of the relationship, which is good.
Yeah. And
for a client who has worked with somebody, particularly with a freelancer, where, you've got that kind of deep emotional bond, and I was a freelancer, that's how I came to do the business. The other business was operating as a freelancer, is that, you've got that deep commitment of saying to a client, I'm suggesting you do this not because it earns me money, but because I believe in it. I absolutely believe in it. It's head and heart stuff, because I have to be totally accountable for the success of it. I've got to be totally accountable for if it fails and sweep up the mess and whatever. So freelancers have got that kind of shared risk attitude with clients, and that's difficult to tease apart. And so clients, I think, they're not looking at their commercial partners, suppliers, whatever word you want to call them, and say, you're just not good enough, you're gone. It can be like, actually, this part of the relationship, it's absolutely banging, it's brilliant. But, we've just obviously come adrift here. If we can fix that, then we're, let's try and fix that. We don't need to worry about that. That's good. Let's build on what's good. And mediation can be a route to that, is to say, to that client perspective, what do you want? It can be, God, if I actually could just get a head round that thing that is absolutely boiling my blood, then we're fine. And I don't want to break the relationship, because most of it is worth saving. And so it's like, okay, well, fine. What do you need to happen for that thing you want, which is a rebalanced relationship to take place? And again, that's that journey from there's your position, Ashley is 70% brilliant and 30% awful. We'll focus on that. And what I want is for Ashley to fix that, and then the rest of it can be protected. I don't want to lose that, because why would I? Because that's the majority of the relationship when I look at it. So it's unwise for either party to think of the other person as 100% what they see, or it's 100% of what's on the table. The dispute is rarely everything that's actually in the relationship. It may be the thing that is absolutely front and center, and it's the thing that's disturbed the balance. But it can mask a whole load of good stuff as well. And if you're a client, you're thinking, I've been working with Ashley for 3 years, 5 years, it's been great, but I'm sick of her. It needs to change. That's a big risk for the client, to go and find somebody else. They need to come out of the market, or they need to stop what they're doing while they find somebody else. And that somebody else may only be 60% good. There's a risk of change. And I think, sometimes that's a good question to ask in that private session of the client, to say, what's worth protecting here? What's worth, actually putting aside the stuff that's making you angry? I mean, if that is, it's absolutely, it's irretrievable, then fine, it's irretrievable. You need to now find the best phased way out of this relationship that protects you, protects, what's valuable in the relationship. So, the continuity of work, or a handover to somebody else, and things like that. All those things that happen when a client starts to work with somebody new. But it doesn't always have to be that way. But it can be. As I said, you can't be totally optimistic about these things. Sometimes it is terminal, and then it's about just a measured way out of the relationship that is beneficial to both parties, but ends up with them both walking away, maybe with a final handshake and a right, okay, good luck, and we're gone. And then the end point of a mediation is, or the end phase of the mediation session is an agreement of heads of terms. So that we say, right, okay, I agree to pay you that £10,000 within 14 days, and you agree to hand over all the materials that are still in process, or so what are the broad elements of what we've agreed between us? So we started there at 9 o'clock this morning, and maybe an hour later, because some mediation can be very, very quick. It can be an hour. It can be less even. But let's say it's a 2 or 3 hour process, and bit by bit, we've agreed elements, we've knocked things out at the beginning, and we've got to a final agreement. nobody in the room is a lawyer. So, I mean, you can have lawyers in the mediation, for obviously if it's a big amount, then you would have lawyers present. They would be part of the process. But if it's a relatively modest amount, then you probably wouldn't have lawyers in there because it just doesn't make sense commercially. But so what you end up with is, can we just be a piece of paper that sort of says, right, I agree to pay you that debt of £10,000. I'll pay it within 14 days, 7 days, whatever the thing is. In return, you agree to do this, this, and this. And you capture that, and that's what you've agreed.
Is that legally binding?
Well, it is when both parties, I mean, it can, if they sign that piece of paper and it's enough detail that, a judge could look at it and say, that is a contract, that is a contract. It's there enshrined on that piece of paper, but it's probably better to say, those are the heads of terms we've agreed. Those are the principles of what we've agreed in this room today. We probably just need to finesse some points. So if it's like, okay, I need to give you access to the source code of the website, or I need to give you all of the photographic materials, or what are the elements that are in there, then it needs to be, and what I mean by I'll give you the source code is this. So it's something that is definable, and that's probably something you would just say, we will agree to finesse what's behind those points between us within 7 days or 14 days. So there's a momentum to it. It's not just kind of, okay, well, we've kind of agreed some stuff, but then we've forgotten it, or we're not really committed to the process, or whatever, because that just brings the dispute back to, it's going to reappear. It's not a solved dispute. So I think and you might want a lawyer then to look over what you've agreed, to say, is this robust? Is it? But it ends, the mediation, successful mediation ends with both parties saying, okay, these are the principal points, because you've started with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points in dispute. So you go through them, and to say, on point number 1, the return of that device that is in our possession and is yours, then that will be delivered to you on next Monday at 9 o'clock. That's a nice simple thing. That's really hard edged. A thing has been promised, it must be delivered. The things like, we will pay that invoice, £10,000 will be paid to your account within 7 days. So again, it's something that's been agreed, it's been captured in a simple document, which, like I said, could be simple as something handwritten, and it's binding on both parties. Yeah.
Well, can we get a little bit more explicit about the kinds of situations that you can help people with? Because what we see a lot of, I mean, you've touched upon it, so I think that I'm right in thinking it'll be similar, but we get a lot of payment disputes. We get a lot of conflicts where there's patience, please. A lot of disagreements around the scope of work. A lot of project management issues where work's not developing as quickly as one party wants or needs. So are those the kind of situations that you would help people reach conclusions with as well?
Yeah. I mean, if no one wants to be in a dispute, and everybody that gets into a dispute knows that they probably should have captured that thing in a document 3 months ago or 6 months ago. Hindsight, wonderful, and that's why lawyers have big houses. But so what you would look at is to narrow down as far as you possibly can what is exactly the dispute. The scope of work is a really hard one, because we've all had clients who kind of say, yeah, great, let's start work, and you rush off and start work, and it's, you're all thinking about, wonderful, how the future's going to be. And then you get those kind of, can you just, I was wondering if, and, I would say, I don't know if this is part of what you offer, but, kind of access to a good lawyer to draw up a contract with clauses that protect you, as the freelancer, and protect both parties. A good contract should be protective of both signatories, and a bad contract is obviously totally one-sided, and no one should sign something that they feel uncomfortable with, or where they can see that they're opening themselves up to that kind of commercial risk. So, do spend time thinking about how could this relationship go wrong, and anticipate that in your contract terms. So, what does it mean when somebody says, we will produce a brochure for you, but then the client doesn't agree to the content until the day before it was supposed to be delivered. Well, if there's no provision in the contract to say, in order for us to deliver what you've specified, you need to play your part in this way, this way, this way. There needs to be sign off, and drafts need to be signed off within 24 hours or 48 hours, or approval given. All of those elements need to go into a contract. And so I would say to anybody watching this, really, really lean into that process. Maybe through insurance, or maybe through membership of professional bodies. You've probably got access to legal helplines. You've probably got access to template contracts. For goodness sake, use them. Because the nature of disputes, they don't suddenly come out of nowhere. As you say, they're very often around payment of invoices is a classic. But scope of work changing, or promises of delivery of materials by the client so that the freelancer can work with them and create the thing that is the end product. If that wasn't delivered on time, these things are universal. These things have been going on forever. So it shouldn't be beyond the ability of anybody watching this to actually go and stress test their own contracts. Go and get them out. I know, I was a freelancer. They are the things that somehow they were the last things that ever got signed. They're the kind of and I think it's good practice to talk about contracts as early as possible in the relationship. When you're working with a new, or in discussion with a prospective new client, get the contract out there, put it on the table as early as possible in the conversation, because it's a kind of a red flag. That if the other party doesn't want to talk about contracts, then they probably, may be wanting to bend contracts when they are signed. So put it on the table, put as much sunlight onto that as you can, as early as possible in the relationship, because it's just good professional practice to say, this is how I work, this is how you should expect me to work, and this is how I expect you to work. We both have a role to play in delivering the work that you're paying for. Just take the time, be the internal, allow your internal lawyer to come to the fore and say, let's look at this. Where could this go wrong? Where is it weak? Where in my professional experience have I been burned, or have I not, that hindsight you said, with hindsight, that client 5 years ago, I should have seen. So for goodness sake, write something into the contract now that protects you from that thing that burned you 5 years ago. And that way you will minimize the landing zone for a dispute. Because, the less room that both parties have to wiggle a bit, it's the harder it is for things to go wrong. So if there's more that is absolutely tied down at the beginning, no contract is perfect. Things change, stuff happens that you can't foresee. That's why we have insurance. But it's you should invest time at the beginning to sort of say, well, how can we restrict the amount of latitude there is, or kind of grey area where things we know in our experience can go wrong. And payment terms is a great one of that. Just to have the clause in there that says, if payment is delayed by such and such, you reserve the right to charge interest payments, and that providing that an invoice is raised properly on the first of the month or whatever it is, and is not challenged by the 14th of the month, then it is deemed to be accepted and is due for payment. It has gone beyond the window where it can be in dispute. And those are simple terms that, to put that into a contract, to say, if I send you an invoice, if I've not heard from you within 14 days, it is agreed that you accept that invoice as being valid, and this is due for payment on the 28 days, and if you don't pay on 28 days, then you reserve the right as the freelancer to charge interest at a certain rate. Yeah. It's just, it's straightforward stuff.
It is. You say that, but not a lot of people do these things.
No, and I'm sitting here, grandly saying, do the contract stuff, and I've been burned myself, when I was freelancing, when I was running agencies, because you want that trust to be rock solid, and you want to begin that relationship with a new client in a way that it's like you've just fallen in love, you just got married, there's honeymoon. Yeah. We talk about honeymoon periods in relationships, with business relationships, and it's absolutely true. And then things change, and that's why you do need to just have that kind of little bit of your brain at the beginning that's saying, let's assume it's all going to go wrong.
Yes.
In 3 months or 12 months. There's a point at which we know that this business relationship will end. Because very few business relationships go on forever, or go on for 5 years or 10 years, whatever. There will come a point where you are ceasing to work with that organization. Now, that could be just because, stuff changes, they get bought, or the business closes, or whatever. It's stuff way outside your ability to influence, and you don't lose any sleep over that. But if it's something where you look back and say, oh, should have seen that coming, it was obvious, and there was nothing that I had to protect me, then that's probably foolish. So you do need to just have that, okay, it's a new relationship, dead excited, great new clients, going to be great work. I've presented some ideas, they love them. It's, we all feel that thrill of winning a new client, but you've got to have that moment of chill to say, okay, project ahead to the point where we part company at some point in the future. Is that going to be on the basis of a fair exchange of stuff in the contract, or is one of us going to get caught out? And if you build some due diligence into that early stage, even pre-contract signing, then you're going to be better protected.
Yeah, see, it's not just me that talks about due diligence all the time in contracts, so that's validating. But I asked the With Jack community if they had any questions, so I do have a few. Awesome. I think we've touched upon a lot of it already, but apologies about Benita being very distracting. So somebody wanted to know, I think you touched upon this already, but what if they proposed mediation with their client and their client refused it? What then?
They've refused it. They don't want to mediate, and there's nothing you cannot force anyone to mediate, and there has to be a judgment of, if they say yes, how willing are they? Are they just, is this kind of going through the motions, and they're just being kind of dragged along because they know in their heart of hearts they're going to be in front of a judge at some point, and if they've refused mediation, they have weakened their position in the eyes of the court. So you need to use your judgment. You cannot force someone to mediate. It works best when both parties come to it seeing the practicality of getting this thing off the table and getting on with our lives. It's going to cost some compromise, whether that's financial compromise or emotional compromise, relationship compromise of saying sorry, if that's an important part of it. You can't force somebody.
Yeah. And this is a good question. Again, we've talked about it, but does mediation damage the client relationship? No.
Well, it's a damaged client relationship at the point of mediation. You wouldn't be mediating with someone that you're totally happy with, there's no dispute. So if you take it that the reason you're going to mediation is that a dispute of such significance exists, then the relationship is damaged. And going back to what I was saying before, is that mediation can be something that solves that dispute and can resolve, and could get it back on track.
And I was thinking about this earlier, can you, when you approach a client about mediation, can you even frame it positively? Like, I'm suggesting this because, like you've talked about, 70% of a relationship is so good. So framing it as like, I want to keep working with you and I want to have a good relationship with you. So framing it in that way instead of, negatively.
Yeah, and you each of us will have to know at what point to play that card.
Yeah.
And you can kind of kid yourself that this to and fro you're having, this back and forth of emails is actually solving the problem, but it's not. But it somehow, it's keeping it front of mind. But if it's not really solving it, there has to come a point where one or the other sort of says, look, we can't have another meeting about this. We can't have another discussion about these points. You know what I think. I think I know what you think. Either you accept my terms or it's over. Or we can go down to the court and we can settle this, because...
But most people want to avoid that.
Of course, nobody wants to go. Well, probably some people like it, but the other thing about the court is that not only will the judge say, "Have you tried to mediate?"
Yeah.
And we'll give you pretty short shrift if you haven't, and certainly punish you if you lose in the award of in the judge's award of what needs to be paid or how it needs to be settled from one to the other. But a court is an open forum. It's recorded. So if you go to court, then everything you say is public knowledge. Somebody, sitting in the gallery can hear that, and the judgment is potentially a document. Mediation, of course, is behind closed doors.
Yeah.
It's totally confidential. Nobody knows it's happening. And there's one kind of quite important point, which is that what is said in a mediation is without prejudice. And what that means is that if you say to somebody in a mediation, actually, I'm really sorry, I totally messed that up. It's my fault. That was my bad. I shouldn't have done that. You cannot, in a future court proceedings, refer to that. You cannot say, or if I offer to you, okay, well, I'll pay you 8 of that £10,000 I owe you. You cannot then say, but you've already offered me 8, and now you're offering me 5. So hang on. You said in our media that it's without prejudice.
Yeah.
Any offer you make is not prejudicing. This is what this means. Is not prejudicing a future court hearing or what you say in court.
That makes sense. Last question, and I really like this one. What if there wasn't a contract in place?
There kind of always is a contract in place.
So there needs to be.
Well, I mean, if I said to you, and I turn to the camera and say, I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that if I said to you, you're my client, I promise to deliver those brochures, or I promise to, that website will be ready on the 1st of June to the spec that we've agreed, that we've discussed in emails, or even just discussed verbally, that is a contract.
Yeah.
A verbal agreement is a contract. It doesn't have to be written down.
So on either way, some kind of audit trail is going to be needed of what was agreed. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it would be unusual for business to be transacted to a degree that ends up, in kind of a semi-legal dispute or a commercial dispute, which is kind of so small that you wouldn't have some sort of contract. There will be agreements, there will be emails, there will be stuff written down, But simply by saying, yes, I will do that thing, just based on what we've agreed between us, that is a contract.
Yeah.
Lawyers, please fire that back at me. But yeah.
Do you think there's anything else that we haven't covered that's worth mentioning?
I think, I don't think so, no. I mean, other than to say, it's the message I'd want to get across to anybody listening to this is, as I said before, it's not rainbows and butterflies. It's not a group hug. It's a difficult process where both parties need to do the thinking and the heavy lifting. And what the mediator does is help them to do that. You're not coming to a mediator to persuade the mediator of the strength of your case, because the mediator is not a judge. They do not decide who is more right and more wrong. So don't come to mediation thinking, I don't need to think anymore. I'm going to give it to that mediator person to solve this problem for me. You are wasting your time. You are going to be solving the problem with the possibly face-to-face or in shuttle meetings, shuttle dialogue in separate rooms with the other party. So, but go into it with a positive attitude to say that this can not only solve the problem, but it can release my brain from all of that trauma and all of that, kind of distraction of a thing, of what it is that's, in dispute, and can get you to where you want to be. But only you know what that is. It's not up to me to decide. It's up to you to think about where do I want this to end up? And is it reasonable? Is it reasonable of me to ask for 100% of the invoice to be paid? Is there some benefit? Is there some substance to what the other side is saying? Was I a bit? Did I really deliver the absolute perfect job? And think hard about what you want the solution to enable you to do in the future, not just how can I make the other side pay. If you come to a mediation thinking this is about, bringing out the baseball bat and trying to make them suffer, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. You've got to think, what is it worth to me to be released from this mental torture of thinking about this damn dispute all the time, of it making me angry and stressed, and I think about it when I'm walking the dog, I think about it when I'm taking the kids to school, whatever it is. What is it worth to me to be released from that, as well as the financial element to it? And what does that, if you can project ahead a month from now, all of this will be in the rearview mirror. And that'll be great because this reason, this reason, this reason. You're halfway to thinking about what you want the resolution to be. And then the tricky bit is like, that's what I want. That's what I think they think at the moment. This is what I know I think about them. I think they think that about me, but I don't know. But what I need to happen to get to nirvana is this. And that's the bit that mediation takes you through.
Is it wrong to say that mediation sounds a bit like therapy?
I've been in media. We've talked about commercial mediation, but there's also workplace mediation, which probably doesn't apply to freelancers. That's where colleagues are in dispute. And I've done a mediation where I had a CEO and a head of marketing worked together for 12 years, and they couldn't be in the same room. 2 hours later, the Kleenex was out with tears, there was hugs, I tell you, it wasn't a group hug, that was, and that started with two individuals, literally like that, the body language is white knuckles and absolute contempt for the other person. And so much of that was locked up in, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's all about communication.
I had no idea. Yeah. And, going back to right where we started, the background, my background is PR communications. And a lot of mediation is the kind of skills that a comms consultant or any kind of creative consultant brings of those open questions of going, where do you want to go with this? What's really on your mind? You know, we've all had briefs, you know, so oh, I want this, I want this, I want this, and these are the outcomes I want. And sometimes, very often, with careful questioning, you can say, okay, you said you want that. Why is that important? Mm-hmm. Well, if I don't deliver that, then, something else that's not in the brief won't happen. Oh, right. So that's the important bit, is that you need certain things to happen which unlock other stuff. And what you're doing as the consultant or the freelancer is unlocking those thoughts in the client's mind. And it's no different to what you're doing in a mediation, is to say, so would it be important to you if that person offered that? Yeah, because then that totally solves something that's been, oh, right. So is that important to you? Well, how important is it? And would you be prepared to make a concession that releases that for you? And so the skills of the mediator are very similar to that kind of trusted advisor role that freelancers hope to have with their clients, where they're not just providers of solutions and they're selling things. They're partners.
Yeah.
They're working together, and there's that bond of trust which sort of says, okay, well, it sounds like what's important here is that. Is that fair? A lot of mediation is replaying back to the person and reframing what's been said. So if you said to me, yeah, well, if that person can just do that, right. So if I understood it correctly, and you reframe it, you replay it back to the person, they go, yeah, well, no, actually what I meant was this. Okay, that sounds like something that you would value if it could happen. Yeah, well, what would you be prepared to give to get that value? Well, I would do this. Okay, are you prepared to offer that to the other person? Could I take that offer through to the other person? Yeah, sure. And now you've moved. Mm-hmm. That, you've got closer together, and that's mediation. Time after time after time after time, until eventually you get
there.
Yeah, you get there.
And if for anybody watching this who thinks that this is something they need help with right now, or a situation arises in the future and you pop into their heads, how can they find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Structuredmediation.com.
There you go, structuredmediation.com. Well, thanks so much for the chat. I feel more educated about it. I never know how to end videos, so I'm just going to awkwardly wave and say bye. Bye.
Bye.